Welcome back to 10% Truth. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
I'm going to just do some announcements for the audience, and then we're going to get into it in this, our second interview. And that is the main announcement for the audience, which is that if you're landing on this interview and you haven't already watched part one, then Bat joined us for a fantastic 2-hour discussion around his experiences in Vietnam and returning from Vietnam and flying the F-4 as an air-to-air instructor at MacDill. And what that led to then eventually was his introduction to the Aggressors and then the MiGs at Area 51. So today we're going to carry on that. But before we do that, I just want to be clear with everybody at home, just so there's no misunderstanding, that everything that Bat's going to talk about is declassified. We have documents from the Air Force that say that it's okay to talk about the programs he's going to talk about. The things that haven't been declassified, he's not going to talk about. And that's something we respect and we honor. And also, just to let you know, there are some good publications that feature Bat and that you might want to go and read if you're interested in doing so. Of course, the first is Red Eagle, was the book that I wrote. I do have a vested interest in plugging that. But T.D. Barnes, who Bat may decide to talk about at some point in this conversation, is another author. He worked at Area 51. He's former CIA. And he has a book called MiGs over Nevada, I think it's called, which is fantastic at telling the story of the MiG exploitations at Area 51 during that particular period in time. But also Peter Merlin, he has a book called Dreamland. It's just the most astonishing piece of work. And if you have the readies, if you've got the money to go and buy it, it's fairly expensive. You can get it on Amazon. It's a huge tome, tells the story of Dreamland. And it also, as far as I'm concerned, is the best account of the Red Hats, which were the sort of counter squadron to the Red Eagles. The Red Eagles did tactical exploitations. The Red Hats did the technical exploitations. They were part of Air Force Systems Command. And I'm hoping I can get back to talk a little bit about the relationship between the tactical air command guys and the Air Force Systems Command guys during the course of this interview. So that's those. And also, then final announcement before I ask back to pick up the story again. If you are listening to this, please please share it. Please subscribe to the channel. I do have a goal of making my podcast the number one aviation podcast in the UK. At the moment, it's number 3. So if you're listening on Spotify or any other podcasting platform, please like this, drop a comment, or do whatever it is else that you feel could help to grow the channel. Those are the announcements made. So, Bat, let's go back then. When we were talking before, you did discuss how the Korean War era tactics were still being used in Vietnam. You talked about the experience you had at MacDill as an F-4 air-to-air instructor being picked to go to the Aggressors. I'd really like to hear your story or your retelling of how the Aggressors were stood up. So we know the reason for them. What was the experience like setting them up? Did you get to go and visit intelligence agencies, get behind the door, study their materials? And how easy or difficult, or what was the experience like bringing those T-38s online and starting to use them as adversary trainers?
Yes. So as we talked last time, so I got back from Vietnam in 1970, and of course the whole reason for the Aggressors in the first place was to redo the tactics from that were being used by the Air Force in Vietnam. Of course, the Navy, in Vietnam, there was 2 air wars. There was the Rolling Thunder, which was from 65 to 68, where the Navy and the Air Force went up north and tangled with the MiGs. And in all those engagements, the kill ratio was 1-to-1 for the Air Force and 2-to-1 for the Navy. 2 kills to one loss. In Korea, it was like 12 to 14-to-1 for the Air Force and the Navy. So, and that was Korea was the first MiG, F-86 jet engagements after World War II. So the next one was 10 years later in Vietnam, and that's when the kill ratios were very poor compared to Korea. So the Navy and then the next time the Air Force and the Navy went up north and engaged the MiGs was in 1972. Okay, so there's a 3 year gap, 3 to 4 year gap between the MiG engagements. And in that 3 to 4 year gap, the Navy uh, did all kinds of studies of why they weren't getting high kill ratios and why the missiles weren't working the way they were supposed to be working because they didn't have guns on their airplanes. So so the Navy had the alt report and they did a lot of studies and so they decided one of the problems was their tactics. They didn't have the right tactics, and because they were still using World War II tactics. I mean, World War II and Korea War tactics. So between the Rolling Thunder and Linebacker, when they went back up north, it was called Linebacker. Between Rolling Thunder and Linebacker, the Navy created Top Gun and changed their tactics from this Korean War uh, finger finger welded wing four ship where only the leader was the shooter. Everybody else was protecting the leader 6 o'clock. And and so the Navy changed their tactics to loose deuce, and they did have some experience with the MiGs and have drill, have donut at the time. We talked about that last time. In '68, 68 and '69, they got MiG 17s and MiG 17 and MiG 21, and into Dreamland, and they started flying against it. So and so did the Air Force. Randy O'Neill and Gil Peck got to fly the MiGs uh, against some fighter weapon school guys. And that was in '68, '69, '70 timeframe. So the so the Navy, but the Air Force never changed their tactics before Linebacker. So when Linebacker started, the in '71, '72, the Navy had changed their tactics to loose deuce, use the vertical, knew how to uh, play with the MiGs. So their exchange ratio went up quite a bit to like 8 to 1 or something in during Linebacker. But the Air Force still only had 1 to 1 or 2 to 1 because they never changed their tactics. So the so in the meantime, during that time, um, Gail Peck, Roger Wells, uh, Boots Boothby, these are the guys that were in the 414th Fighter Weapons School at Nellis. They went up to the generals and convinced the generals that the Air Force needs to change their tactics. They need to go to what they call DACT, Dissimilar Air Combat Training. They need to create a separate squadron of MiG-like airplanes, and they picked the T-38 to again expose the Air Force fleets, the F-4 squadrons around the Air Force to how to fight the MiG-21, and they use the T-38 as a simulator for that. So they got approval to create the Aggressor Squadron in 1972, about the time that Linebacker was started and almost finished. So they got the approval for the Aggressors at that time before Linebacker, but by then it was too late to retrain everybody, and so they went to Vietnam. The Air Force went to Vietnam with the old tactics. Um, but the Navy already had Top Gun started, and they were doing all kinds of exploitation and uh, change. And all the guys who went Top Gun were getting to fly against the MiGs in Dreamland or Area 51. The fighter weapon school guys were flying against those guys, Gail Peck and O'Neill. Um, so, like I said, in summer '72, the aggressor started. Okay, and like I said, I was an air-to-air instructor at MacDill at the time in the F4. Fortunately got selected to be in the initial cadre, so I went out, got a T-38 checkout, and then started standing up the aggressors. So when we stood up the aggressors, it was okay. We did get clearance into the Foreign Technology Division at Wright Pat, which is Systems Command Foreign Technology Division, which does all the exploitation and gets all the documents of the tactics documents and um, airplane documents from wherever they get them from, and they so yes, we did get clearance behind the green door to go uh, do those, and then because uh, Randy O'Neill became the first ops officer, and he was flying in a program called Rivet Haste. Okay, it started off as Have Glib. This is the exploitation of the MiG 17, MiG 21s that we got from Israel uh, at in Area 51. So Randy O'Neill became the first ops officer. I think Gail Peck at the time left uh, the fighter weapons school and went up to headquarters, and that's and so he was in school and went to headquarters and was working on uh, getting the aggressors stood up with the generals and stuff. So, but Randy O'Neill became the first ops officer, and so he obviously knew about the MiGs, and so he got approval to get a couple of the aggressors, three of the aggressors, into the and they changed Rivet Haste to Have Idea. So it became Have Idea, where some aggressors would be flying the MiGs. So he got me and two other guys. I think Kobe and Iverson were the other two. Kobe Mayo. So we'd go up to Dreamland, Area 51, and fly against. First, we'd fly against the fighter weapons school. Then we'd fly against the 422 guys, the tactics guys that did the tactics development at Nellis, and so that was Hive Idea, is tactics development. And
Can I interrupt you, Mike, and just ask a couple of questions about that then? So one of the things that I'm curious about, and this goes back to what I'd said in the intro about the relationship between you and Air Force Systems Command. If you read Merlin's book, he talks about the time that Randy O'Neill and maybe two other guys who were before you, Iverson and Mayo, had turned up to do, and I don't know if it was Rivet Haste. I think it might have been, because I think Evil Peck talked about it in his book too. He turns up and he says that Norm Suits, who was the project officer, I guess, for Idea, made it very clear he didn't want you on his turf. That there was sort of a fiefdom type thing, perhaps an ownership of the assets. And I think Evil says in his book that Randy O'Neill just tore him a new one. And after that, everything was good. That's kind of what Evil says. So, I know you weren't there for that, but I do want to understand, because you've got Glenn Frick as well, who's writing the test plans, isn't he? He's writing the plans to justify TAC sending guys to fly the airplane. So what was the relationship like between you and the Red Hats then? Was it terse? Was there tension?
No, not when I was there. Maybe that happened before when Gail Peck and Randy O'Neill were flying Rivet Haste. Uh, and Norm Suits was the Red Hat, so he was Systems Command. Okay, we called them Golden Arms, test pilots. So uh, yeah, there's always some friction between uh, the uh, the test pilots and AFSC and the tactical pilots. Because these guys, all these guys at fighter weapons school and Randy O'Neill and Gail Peck and all of them, just came back from Vietnam. They were in combat. Yeah, and the guys at System Command, I don't think, I doubt Norm Suits ever went to combat. Most of the Systems Command guys now. George Muller, who took over from Norm, uh, George Molnar, he did combat in Vietnam, but I'm not too sure. Some of the guys, I don't know about Norm, but some of the systems command guys never went to combat, so there was probably some friction there. But anyway, um, so TAC TAC got and the Navy on the Navy side, VX4 and Top Gun guys got to fly the MiGs and in Area 51 also.
So
So
can I ask you just a follow-up question on that then? So when you were there, and you were flying, and this may be this is kind of a researchy question, really, not a great question for a podcast, but I have the opportunity to ask you, so I should just use it. When I'd written in Red Eagles that Glenn Frick would write the test plan, do the justification. When you were there to go and fly the aeroplane, did you have to have a reason for that particular sortie? Could you go and fly the aeroplanes because you've been allotted some time and you could do whatever you wanted at that time? Or did you have to say, no, we've got to do an exposure for 422 and it's against these guys who've never flown against the MiGs, and so therefore there's a valid justification?
no, Glenn Frick would write the test plans, so it was an actual a test flight, a tactics test flight. So he would, so it was either 1v1 or 1v2 or 2v2 or 2v4. And and he would write the test plan, and then we'd go brief it at Nellis with the guys that are going to be flying it, and then the next day or maybe the same day, we'd go fly the mission, and then after the mission, we'd spend 2 or 3 hours debriefing, what how that particular tactic worked against the airplane.
Can you expound on that? What was the evolution then of the tactics that you developed? I mean, that's a very specific question. I don't know if there are things that stick in your mind.
Yeah, a lot of the evolution was based on what the Navy did, because the Navy went to this loose deuce concept where you loose deuce is you got, instead of having a shooter and a wingman, you got two shooters flying almost line abreast, and either one, you got a leader, but the if the wingman who's also a shooter and he's line abreast at about 1,500 feet or 2,000 feet, or maybe 3,000 feet line abreast, coming into a fight, and either one of them are shooters. So if the wingman sees the guy first and he's in a better position to attack, then he becomes a shooter, and the leader becomes a support, and then use the vertical. So the shooter will go in, maybe, he'll be, especially if he sees him and he's coming in up at 6 o'clock, he won't go in the vertical. He'll just come straight in. The other the other wingman who's covering will go into the vertical and watch the fight from above, and then if there's another airplane or something comes into the fight and becomes a 2v2, then you got each guy, taking being able to engage. So
How
it,
did,
it
how did you factor in missiles into this training then? So you talked in the last episode about in this episode about the Alt report. In the last episode, you talked about Red Baron. Part of I think both of those those were analyses of engagements in Vietnam and the reasons they went well, the reasons they failed. And one of the things that came out of that was that the AIM-7 wasn't working as well as it should, low PK. The AIM-9 wasn't working as well as it should. So when you're doing this training, are you just talking about a guns only engagement? Are you simulating Sparrow shots?
by that time in 70, 72, 73, the F4 E was for the Air Force. Air Force developed the F4E, which had an internal gun. Okay, but the Navy never did put an internal gun on their airplanes. So the Navy always it was always a missile engagement for the Navy. Okay, so the Air Force, because they had the gun now, uh, so there was a little difference in the tactics, but it's basically the same. As the Air Force, what they did is they spread their formation out. It became a fluid four formation, where you basically had it was same formation as the loose deuce, but you had either two or four ship, but it was basically line abreast. You come in line abreast, 3 to 5,000 feet spread, and and use the vertical. So it's basically the same tactics as the Navy, except that the Air Force had the gun and the Navy didn't. Okay,
Were
so
were you seeing then at that time improvements in the performance of Sparrow and Sidewinder, or were they sort of online to come into
uh,
service better?
yeah, they no, they never until you got the AIM-9L, okay, and the AMRAAM, and those are some of the other uses of have idea airplanes. When we were doing so it was the same time that they were developing the lightweight fighter, between 71 or 72 and 1980. And I think I mentioned this maybe last time, that this was probably the most significant development of air power, uh, in the last 50 years since Billy Mitchell, because um, at that time, after Vietnam, decided we needed a couple things. We needed longer range missiles that were, full aspect long range missiles. We needed a gun on every airplane, but we needed a lightweight fighter. Okay, the F4 was, you know, it wasn't a great dogfighter. So they developed uh, well, that's when they developed the F-18 and the F-16. Okay. Air Force picked the F-16, the Navy picked the F-18 as the lightweight fighter. And um, so that was like in 1974, 75, when the YF-16, the YF-18. So they'd come up and we'd fly against the MiGs. So have
Mhm.
idea.
Okay.
So we flew against the YF-16 and the YF-17, the MiGs. And and then that's the same time they developed the AIM-9L, all aspect Sidewinder, and the AMRAAM. the long range to replace the Sparrow.
Mm.
Okay. And we'd fly against. So uh, the fighter weapon school guys would and that's the F-15 guys, F-15 fighter weapon school guys would have AMRAAM. They'd have the AIM-9L and the AMRAAM simulate on their airplanes, and we'd fly the MiGs against those guys.
Okay.
Uh,
Was that AIM Val Ace Val? Was that
AIM Val,
is that
yeah,
okay.
AIM Val, yeah, that was the AMRAAM and the AIM-9L. The airplane development was different. So then some other things that went on during that time is, um, of course, the Red Baron report, where they evaluated every engagement in Vietnam. Uh, we also did some studies on what what makes a pilot an ace an ace. Okay, so we
Right.
went back all the way to World War One, and I was part of this study of uh, figuring out. Okay, you got all these thousands of fighter pilots in World War One, World War Two, Korea, and only 5% or less of all the hundreds of thousands of fighter pilots became aces. Okay, and and all the kills since World War One all the way through Vietnam, 80% of the kills, the guy getting shot down never saw who was attacking him. Okay, so only 20% of all the engagements, hundreds of thousands of engagements, ended up in a dogfight. Okay, and most of the aces got all their kills sneaking up behind the guy
Mm.
and shooting him down, and the guy never saw it. And so, the World War One, of course, Oswald Boelke was the father of the fighter pilot. Okay, a German uh, pilot, Oswald Boelke, and he created the first formation flight. Him and Emmelman, uh, was it Max Emmelman was his wingman, and they they started a loose deuce. They were in a loose deuce formation. Okay, line abreast, and they were covering each other 6 o'clock. Well, Boelke was the lead, and then Emmelman was the wingman. He was covering Boelke's 6 o'clock as Boelke went in and attacked. Okay, and they were using hand signals and wing wagging for their signals. And so that was the first formation. And then, so of course, Richtofen was the leading ace, and he was taught by Oswald Boelke, and he got 80 kills. And in World War One, then World War Two, the Blonde Knight, uh, Eric Hartman, uh, was the leading ace ever.
Mm.
He got he got 352 kills, and but he said every kill he had was the guy never saw him. He was
Yeah.
he was the hun in the sun. He hid in the sun, and then he'd wait until he got the advantage, and then he'd attack and shoot the guy, and then pull off and go back up into the sun. And um, so in Vietnam, it was the same thing. You know, 80% of the U.S. guys got shot down, mostly Air Force, uh, and never saw the attacker. And so So we did some studies at that time, back in this uh, 75 time frame when they were developing these new fighters. McDonnell Douglas uh, built some simulators, air-to-air simulators, so you can go in there, and so I they picked me as one of the guys. We go back to St. Louis and get in this air-to-air simulator. I'd be flying the MiG, and then uh, they had a F-18 or F-16 or F-15, and we go fly combat air dogfight in the air-to-air simulator. And it turned out that um, what they found out, they had a lady there that was a contractor from the human factors uh, uh, de department in AFSC, and Micah Ensley was her name, and she would document all these engagements, and and she realized that some guys were better than others, and they would have the most kills, and so that versus no matter what airplane they're flying, if they're flying the MiGs or they're flying the F-16 or the F-18, and um, uh, they would have the most kills and win the most dogfights. And so then, because she was in human factors, she was trying to figure out, well, why? Because the airplanes are the same, the tactics are the same, but some guys are better than the others. And why is that? And same thing when we studied all Eric Hartman and Oswald Boelke and Richthofen and all these other aces. Why is 5% of the all the guys that flew combat? Why is only 5% of them better than the others? Is it because they're better stick and rudder guys, or is there something else? Well, that's when we determined the situation awareness was the determining factor.
Really?
That yeah, that situation awareness that and it turns out, and this goes back to what I was talking about earlier about um, visualization. When when I was checking out in pilot training, I can visualize the flight. Well, you can also visualize your surrounding airspace and look at another airplane and visualize where that airplane's going to be uh, once you lose sight of them, where you might be if you lose sight. So most of the engagements we'd set up, they were head-on engagements, and then both airplanes would turn to try to get behind the other one, and so you lose sight of this airplane, your enemy, a minute as he goes behind the cockpit, and in order to pick him up again, you have to know where to look in the sky to pick him up as you turn back around. And so you have to visualize where that guy's going to be uh, based on what he did when you crossed. Did he turn left or did he turn right? Did he go up or down? And and then you kind of figure, and how fast was he going, and what's the performance of his airplane, and and then you can pick him up. You know where to look when you come around 180 degrees. So you have to visualize in your head what that enemy's doing as you lose sight of them. And because there's only so many things he could do. He could go straight ahead and leave, or if he's going to come back and engage, he can go up, he can go down, or he can go left or right. And and so you gotta figure out where he's going to be. You can pick him up again and be able to engage him. So anyway, she did a lot of studies on this, figuring out, you know, what what was your situation awareness as you entered the fight? Okay, and the guys with the best situation awareness were usually the guys that won the fight.
Is that where the term then was coined from that study, situational awareness? Because I think you said when we talked about it last time, you said situational awareness as a thing didn't exist. It existed as a,
It
you
didn't
know,
exist before that. I don't think it did. Nobody,
wow.
certainly the fighter weapons school and the guys that developing the tactics. So I was involved in that study, and so we started developing um, situation awareness as a teaching situation awareness
Mm.
in the syllabus, and grading situation awareness in all the syllabus training documents.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So that we were doing that, and we were doing. They were also trying to develop a laser gun. So
Oh,
so
really?
yeah. So in the simulator, they put one of the F-18s or F-15s would have a laser gun on it, and and the and then the MiG would fight this F-15 with a laser gun, and so the only way to defeat a laser gun, I learned a tactic to defeat a laser gun, because the laser gun has to stay on the same part of the airplane for at least a second or so. Okay, to burn through to the fuel cell. Okay, so I learned that the best tactic against that is to do aileron rolls as you're going through, as you're head on, do aileron rolls, so the guy can't focus the laser on any one part of the airplane as you're merging with him. And then, eventually he's going to get you. But um,
How were those MiG simulators at St. Louis then? How realistic were they? I mean, were they just at that point? Did you have EM graphs for the aeroplanes? Had they programmed those into the sims?
we had all the graphs, and then they'd soup it up, so maybe it's a MiG-25 or something like that,
Mm.
So I mean, yes, they had all that. So it was pretty realistic, actually, pretty realistic. And they still, now they've developed those simulators now. They do a lot of training in the simulators, combat training in the simulators now. And now they got the goggles, and you can do it with the goggles. And so but that was 20 years ago or more than that. Anyway, so we did that. Let's see. There were some other things. Of course, red flag started at that time, and so we had red flag, um, uh, and then the tactics development, and then eventually they started bringing in some outside people. But that's about the time Constant Peg started in '78, bringing guys in from the field.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, it was tactics development, have idea, and and then they started bringing guys from the field in. Uh,
Tell me about then, or tell us rather, the audience about your thoughts on the MiG 17 and the MiG 21. Then you presumably got to fly both of those types when you were assigned to have idea from a as a TAC guy. Um, what did you think of them? And one thing, sorry, I'm gonna just counter myself by saying I have to ask you a question first because it did dawn on me when we spoke last time. When we spoke last time, you talked about having documentation, tactics manuals, and so your checkout process was to go through that, and there was some study involved. And I'm sure you know this from reading Red Eagles, which I interviewed you for many years ago, and which I know you've read. But I was told that during Constant Peg there was a dearth of technical documentation, and that people didn't have the pilot manuals and the tactic manuals, and then eventually the Air Force wrote their own, and that obviously jars a little bit with what some other people had said to me. So can we just find out what your experience was specifically then when you got to, when you got dropped off in that F4 and told go and look in that hangar and don't look anywhere else. At that point in time, was there a lot of paperwork that you could read to understand the operating characteristics of the aeroplane, how to run the systems, all that kind of stuff?
No, there wasn't.
Okay.
There wasn't. Uh, the tactics manuals were all behind the green door. And so we had some guys that got the clearance to go there. I think Iverson maybe, and a few other guys would have to go back to Wright-Patterson, the Foreign Technology Division, and get their passes into the green door and go read them.
Okay.
Or we'd have they had guys in in Foreign Technology Division that would read the tactic manuals and translate them, and so we knew what the tactics were, but no, I didn't. We'd have to the guys that cleared behind the green doors, they would come brief us on what the tactics were, and then we'd fly the tactics. And mostly back in those days, and it might be the same now, but it was all Russian tactics were all GCI, ground controlled intercepts, um, very little free flying like the U.S. Let the pilots go out there and create their own tactics. But it was very strict formations, very strict GCI control, and intercepts, mostly intercepts only. So
That's a good point. I mean, a central component of Constant Peg was, of course, that they had their own GCI controllers who were cleared into the program and were taken from other parts of the Air Force. But at that point, for Have Idea, did you have a similar thing then? Were you integrating any kind of GCI into your training schedule?
no, not as much. No, because at that time, uh, the only uh, systems command they had captured GCI stuff, but it wasn't used in Have Idea. I
Yeah.
mean, we didn't, and most of our GCI aggressor GCI guys were not cleared in.
Yeah.
So it was all visual setups um, that we you
So,
know.
so tell us then, because I did interrupt myself by asking a different question mid question. What did you think of the MiG-17 and the MiG-21 then as a pilot's aircraft as a pilot's aircraft? What
Yeah, well, I like the MiG-17 the best because it was it turned on a dime and it was easy to fly. Uh, the MiG-21, it was more like, I don't know, it's probably like a, 102 or a 106. It was, delta wing. It was fast, obviously. It turned pretty good, but it bleed off energy real fast because of the delta wing. And so, you get in a slow turning fight with the MiG. It wasn't as good as it's more of an interceptor than anything. And um, one of the nightmares I always have is flying the MiG-21 and Have Idea. Uh, I get in a dogfights with the fighter weapons school guys. Okay, and most of them pretty good. So, and they especially they get the especially if they when they started the new tactics and they get in the vertical and so you get in a slow speed fight with an F4 and it kind of especially the F4E, the F4E, with slatted wings and all that. It could do pretty good against the MiG-21 in a slow speed fight. Uh, Although it couldn't gain the advantage, but it can hold its own with a good pilot. Uh, and So I remember going a 1v2 against two fighter weapon school F4s in the MiG-21 in the box over Groom Lake. And we started off at, I don't know, 15,000 feet. And of course, in Have Idea, there was no floor. Usually you have a floor where you knock it off, 5,000 feet above the ground or 10,000 feet above the ground normally. But in Have Idea, there was no rules of engagement. I mean, there's fight fight until the other guy bails out and or somebody wins. So uh, so there's no knock it off. So I get in this rolling scissors with a. I ended up in a rolling scissors with the F4. I mean, yeah, and I forget who it was. It might have been Mike Ryan at the time, but because he was a good pilot. And we get in this rolling scissors and started off at about 10,000 feet, and then uh, and you keep, you're only holding about 150 knots or 200 knots as you're going down and down and down, and and so I get down close to the ground, but I'm in mill power the whole time. Okay, and because I was low on gas and all that, so you either have to say, well, I'm not winning this fight, so I'm going to try to escape and before I get shot, and and or knock it off and say, okay, I'm dead, and so like a dumb captain at the time, I said, well, I need afterburner. If I'm going to win this fight, I need to get an afterburner. So I'm about 100 knots, sticks way back and don't have much air going through the front of the airplane. And so I kind of hold my breath and push it into afterburner. And unfortunately, the afterburner lit off, and I eventually won the fight, but I was only like, I don't know, 2,000 feet above the ground. And if the afterburner didn't light, and maybe it'll get a compressor stalled or something, you know. So in my dream, I'm I'm you know in my dream I'm going the afterburner doesn't light off, and I go, oh shit, and and then my wife knocks me on the head and said, you know, you you dumb shit, go back to bed. you know, uh, but yeah, that was probably not smart to do back
Did you
then.
did you think about that then? I mean, I know it might sound like a ridiculous question, but maybe the question I mean to ask is how much did you think about the fact these were national assets? Some guys didn't trust the seats and would decide to try and dead stick or they had pre-visualized that's what they would do if something went wrong. Some people said they were going to bail. Some people said it was too important to bail out of. How did you view it? What was your attitude towards it?
That happened to me, you know, back in 1980 when I dead stick the MiG-23. You know, I, 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 I left, I left, in LS to go off to school and over to Iran, but then I came back and got back in the constant peg, and I was flying the MiG-23, and that happened to me. That I was I was doing BFM with Marshall McLeod. Uh, Bless his heart, he died flying. He died after he became a general. He was flying a AN something
Oh,
up
Yak 52, wasn't it?
up in Alaska and on a weekend and crashed. But he was flying the F5 or the T-38 as a chase, and we were doing some BFM and the MiG-23, and uh, I got out of control, and the wings were back in the MiG-23 at the time, and I was up at about 20,000 feet, just doing some advanced handling stuff, and uh, went out of control, got into a spin. Uh, the engine caught on fire during the spin. I think it's in your book. You
Mhm.
talked about Red Eagle, and and the in the MiG-23, the engine has these cooling louvers, uh, bleed air louvers around the first or second stage of the compressor blades, and the engine warped in this while it was in the spin, and the louvers, uh, compressor blades grabbed the louvers and shoved them down the engine, and that's engine caught on fire and basically wiped the engine out. So I'm first of all, I got to recover from the spin, so which I did at about 10,000 feet above the ground, and then uh, put the wings forward, and still had some hydraulics because the engine was still rotating, but wasn't putting any thrust out. The engine pulled the fire bottles, put out the fire. And Marshall McLeod says, you know, you're on fire, punch out, you know. And that's when I just thought, well, are these seats going to work? I don't know if the seats are going to work. I got Tonopah, you know, in my sight, about 20 miles away, and I'm coming down like the space shuttle at about, you know, 2,000 feet a minute, whatever, I don't know. And I'm going, well, I think I might be able to make Tonopah. And if I don't, I'll try to dead stick it into the desert or something, you know. But I'm not going to punch out of this airplane because I don't know if the seats work. And unfortunately, I did a straight in, and I landed. Uh, I blew the gear down pneumatically at about 1,000 feet, and landed 500 feet down the runway.
It's phenomenal.
Huh?
Phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah, it was something else.
Did did
So,
you did you get an award for that?
huh?
Did you get an award for that?
Well, they put me in for an award, and so I went back to, uh, but we weren't supposed to be. This was like I don't know, my fifth flight in the airplane. We weren't supposed to be doing any kind of hard maneuvering, you know. And so they put me in for a ward, and I went back to I think General Dixon was the TAC commander at the time. He was a hard ass, and I got up in front of him, and he says, okay, tell me a little about this incident you had with one of our national assets. And so I told him. And he says, well, I'll tell you what, Mike. He says, they put you in for an award, but I'm gonna call it even because I was gonna court-martial you. He says, so I'm not gonna give you an award, I'm not gonna court-martial you, but don't do that ever again.
Hey everybody, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but if you'd like to support the channel, please do visit 10percenttrue.com and take a look at my store. You can buy polo shirts, t-shirts, stickers, patches, and even my books. And speaking of which, if you're listening to the podcast, this won't make sense, but if you're watching it, then great. The one that's being played in the background at the moment is my new book, F-15E Strike Eagle, Be Afraid of the Dark, Part 1. It's a glorious coffee table book, been professionally laid out and put together, tells the story of the Strike Eagle from 1984 to 2002. I'm taking pre-orders for it now. If you're interested in it, if you're thinking that might make a nice present for somebody, please do go ahead, visit 10percenttrue.com. Place an order. Thank you. So you've already said, so you went back to, for anybody at home who's thinking you missed Iran out, we'll come back to Iran, but so we'll just stick with talking with MiGs for the moment. But so you went back to Constant Peg. You said Earl Henderson asked you back when you got back from Iran. It sounds like you jumped at the chance. But what had you noticed in terms of changes then between idea when you were one of the very early guys to be in that? It was during its infancy, let's say, and then the much more formalized Constant Peg.
Right. What happened? Let's see. I think it was 1977, when Constant Peg got started. Okay, 77, 78 time frame. And Frick had moved over from Have Idea to Det One, and the Have Idea moved over to the Det One, and then which was a trailer in Nellis, basically. And so all the guys that were flying Have Idea moved over there. I had left about the same time, sometime in 19. I went in summer of 77. I went to school. I was selected as a major and went to Army Command and Staff College. Okay, and so that was because of my Vietnam Army days. Instead of going to Air Force Command and Staff at Maxwell, they sent to Army Command and Staff, which was in Leavenworth, Kansas, and then so I went there, and then after that, I got selected to go over to let's see, that was in 78. Yeah, so in 78, after I graduated there, I went to got an assignment to Iran to be the F5 advisor in Iran. Okay, so and that was going to be my staff tour after command and staff. So I went there to the and the advisory group at the time was General Secord was the commander of the advisory group in Iran, and so looking back, I think Secord and some of the generals were kind of following my career path and making sure I went to the right places. Anyway, because my first assignment in Iran was getting the Shah's F5 fleet ready for a gunnery meet with the Pakistani MiG-19s. So
Interesting.
every year, the Iranian Air Force under the Shah, uh, F-5s, had a gunnery meet with the Pakistani MiG-19s. So my first assignment was to go around to the F-5 squadrons and help them pick the team members that were going to fight the MiG-19s. And the gunnery meet was air to ground and air to air. So they'd have air to air engagements and they'd film them and decide who won the air to air engagements. So that was my first assignment in Iran. But I left the aggressors and the MiGs in '77, about the time that Constant Peg was getting started. Okay, so I wasn't part of the initial Constant Peg cadre. Uh, so you asked what was different when I came back. Well, um, so let me go through my Iran story first
Okay.
because it's a good war story.
Okay.
Okay, so I get to Iran in uh, sometime summer of '78, and and the the Shah was still in charge, and of course they had, I don't know, 300 over 300 F-5s. They had a couple of hundred F-4s, a couple of hundred F-18s, and then they had, Army advisors, they had Navy advisors. I mean, there was all over the country. There was advisors helping the Iranians, and so they had about, I don't know, thousand advisors or more in country, and they had 40,000 Americans, contractors, and Americans in country. Well, the revolution actually started in about late summer of '78 is when a lot of the rioting started, and anti-Shah, anti-American stuff started in the streets. I was in Tehran. I was living in uh, a house in northern Tehran with the landlord was an army colonel, and he lived on the first floor, and I lived on the second floor with my family. And then so the anyway, it started getting bad with riots and shootings and stuff late summer, and and uh, but the U.S. government wasn't, they weren't going to declare an evacuation at that time. But I saw the writing on the wall, so I got my family out, uh, and so it's just me. I stayed behind, uh, and so um, it kept getting worse and worse. And then by December, the U.S. government decided, okay, we better declare an evacuation because it kept getting worse. Uh, so so General Secord called, you know, 500 or the advisors that were in Tehran uh, into an auditorium, and he said, "Okay, we're going to need some volunteers to stay behind and help the embassy evacuate the Americans. So I only want the guys, the enlisted guys and or officers that have been in Vietnam and been on the ground in combat to raise your hands." About 50 of us did. So, so he says, "Okay, well, you're the volunteers, so you're staying behind. Everybody else is dismissed. Get your families, right, and evacuate." So, so we stayed behind, and so you know we got 40,000 Americans out in 2 months. So by the end of January, uh, all the Americans were out. And we were getting ready to leave. I was getting ready to pack up. And that's about the time the revolution, the actual hard revolution started. That's when the Shah left in 79, end of January. The Khomeini came in. The Revolutionary Guards took over all the bases, armories, set up barricades, shut the borders down, shut the airports down. And so get a call, or I called the you know the embassy and said, um, you know, what do we do? You know, uh, they said, well, just stay put. We're working on it. And about that time, some Revolutionary Guards come to the house, uh, climb over the wall, start firing at the house with AK-47s, and about 20 Revolutionary Guards. And after the fact, landlord's downstairs, I'm upstairs. I see him coming over the walls, shoot through the windows and stuff. And so I uh, I used my Vietnam E&E, escape and evasion tactics that I was taught before going to Vietnam, and looked out the back window, and nobody was out the back window. So I take my 38 revolver and jump out the window and take off through the streets of Tehran out the back. And and these guards are, they capture the colonel that was living downstairs. And so I'm on the streets of Tehran. This is middle of winter, in January, and I do have a coat on, but and a 38 revolver, and that's all I got. So so I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, uh, where do I go? How do I get out of here? And I did remember that one of the advisors that was a friend of mine that lived down the street, or lived a couple streets over. He had left early because he had got shot coming back from dinner one night in his doorway, and he got shot. He got shot and wounded, so they evacuated him out back in December or something like that. And he left the house in care of these Sri Lankese houseboys, and so I kind of figured out how to get there, and I escaped over there and tapped on the windows, threw a rock on the window, and the houseboy comes out in Sri Lanka. Major Press, what are you doing down there? You know, I said, let me in, So I go in there, and he says, what happened? And I told him, and they said, yeah, uh, they're, we heard they're searching for you. They think you're CIA because the colonel, I thought he was an army colonel. The colonel was Savak, okay, which is the secret police uh, for the Shah. And
Wow.
so the colonel was Savak, and they think you're CIA, so they're searching for you. I said, well, I need to hide out. And so I said, well, they said, okay. So they hid me out for a couple of days. And then I found out, um, well, I called the embassy and said, I need to get picked up. They said, no, can't pick you up, you know. So, you know, maybe you can go over, maybe you can find your way over to this other major's house that was living with some Canadians. and there's across town, and so we so these Sri Lankese put me in the trunk of their car, and we drove across town, and there was barricades everywhere, and so I got there and stayed there with a couple other advisors at this Canadian house for probably 2 weeks, and watched the revolution firsthand.
Wow.
And then so then we're trying to figure out, well, how are we going to get out of this? How we how are we going to get out of here? So then we decided we're gonna. One guy still had his car, so I said, you know, why don't we go out through Turkey? Get our way up to Turkey and try to get out that way. So we got all packed up. We were ready to go, and then we get a call. We get a call from we had an HF. They had an HF radio. So we get a call. It said the U.S. government has made an agreement with Khomeini to let the last Americans out because they were going to get their money back from they were getting billions of dollars back uh, from all the Shah's you know money, and so they were going to let the last Americans out, but you had to get your own way to the airport, and by tomorrow or the next day. So we packed ourselves up into this old Mercury that the guy had, one of the guys had. We had some guns then. We had some rifles and guns, but there was barricades between northern Tehran to the airport, and all the intersections were barricaded, with Revolutionary Guards with rifles and checking people. So we made a run for it. Went through all the barricades, getting shot at, shooting back. got got to the airport and got the last flight out.
Really? That's crazy.
Yeah. So then, so then I get back. So I uh, get back to the States, and I don't have an assignment. And so
Sorry, I have to stop you. You can't just move on from that story like that.
huh?
So I have to stop you. We've got to stay in Iran for a little bit. So I asked you in the first episode about your time in Vietnam and whether or not you ever experienced fear. And you talked about your preoccupation with the safety of the guys on the ground, and it wasn't something you spent a lot of time thinking about. You had 2 weeks in that safe house in Tehran. Did you then experience fear or getting shot at as you drove through these barricades?
Really? Not really. I was just, again, I mean, even getting, jumping out the window and running around the streets of Tehran. No, I was, again, you know, you, you get in a survival mode. You're not fearful. You're trying to think ahead and how you gonna get out of this situation.
Wow. What
Yeah.
about then the piece you were talking about earlier when you talked about going and the first assignment was get the F5 guys ready? Did you know what was happening to the I don't know what the name of them, the Shah's forces, the Islamic Republic is what it's called now, but whatever his forces were called, did you know what was happening to those people? Did you have any attachment to the people that you had met there? Did it weigh on your
Yeah,
mind?
actually, I did. I had an attachment to the colonel downstairs. Uh, I was pretty attached to them, the family, and and come to find out, he did get captured, and he was tortured and put in prison, but his family got out somehow. They got out, and they went to Utah, and I get a letter. I got a letter after about 3 years later. I get a letter from the wife and says, um, "Major Press, I don't know where you are or what you're doing, but eventually got out of Iran, escaped from prison, and went across Turkey like I was going to do, and the Turks captured him and threw him in jail, thinking he was an Iranian spy,
Wow.
and he was an Iranian spy. Uh, so uh, and he was very pro-American, and so I was wondering if you can help uh, with your contacts to see if the consulate in Turkey could intervene and see if you can't get him released and sent to the United States. So I did contact the State Department and some contacts that I had, and they did intervene and got him released and back to the States.
Wow. Well, what about Secord? Did he know your background? I mean, he was working for CIA as well, and he
So
was.
what happened to Secord after that Iran? He got sent to uh, Cairo to run the mission in Cairo, run the advisory mission in Egypt. Okay. And I think at the same time, Frick went over there. This was 1980,
Hmm.
81. Okay. And so Secord and Frick got a hold of Mubarak and traded the MiG-23s, squadron MiG-23s for a squadron, I don't know, F-16s, I think, maybe,
Um,
or F-4s. I don't know
yeah,
what it was.
fours initially, but they got the F-16s as well.
Yeah. And so that's how Constant Peg got the MiG-23s.
Yeah, yeah.
Secord, Secord and Frick worked that deal.
Because he was a heavy guy, wasn't he? He had flown heavies. He wasn't a fighter pilot.
He wasn't a fighter pilot, but he was, no, he was mostly a special forces guy.
Special forces. Okay, yeah. Because he had done this. I can't remember the name of the programs. He did two programs for the CIA where he was flying, I think, along the Iranian border in a light aircraft to test Russian GCI
Yeah.
or Russian EW systems, see how high they would
Oh,
detect him
yeah.
at. And he was doing all kinds of freaky shit.
Stuff. Yeah. I think he was, yeah, part of that group.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Secord. So I went back. I didn't have an assignment. Uh, I got a call from, I got a call from, here's why I got a call from somebody at, uh, that I knew and says, "Hey, Mike, I hear you're back from Iran. You don't have an assignment. How about meeting somebody at the Pentagon and want to talk to you about an assignment?" So I go there and meet him, and it was to go fly some MiGs for some third world country, and
Yeah.
uh, and so as an advisor, and I said, so I was thinking about it, and then Earl Henderson calls me, and this was in 1980, about the time that Hugh Brown crashed the MiG-17, died, and Gil Peck got fired, and Henderson was going to take over, and so he called me the summer of 79 and says, "Hey, Mike, I hear you're on the street. You're looking for assignment. You want to come back to Nellis and fly the MiGs?" I said, "Yeah, twist my arm." Yeah, so that's how I got back in the constant bag at that time.
Which brings us back to the question: how had it changed? The business of flying MiGs.
It changed quite a bit because Um, it wasn't a test program anymore. It was just a familiarization program. Familiarize the fleets to the MiGs, flying red flag, bring in squadrons that are going to red flag, let them come up to Tonopah and fly against the MiGs. So it's more of let's expose the MiGs to every fighter pilot in the fleet in the force.
Did,
So
did did the guys then in the squadron know your past? Was the idea program and the things that predated? I think the 4477 test and evaluation flight was established in the summer of 1977. The first ops happened from Tonopah, I think, in summer of 79, I think. Those guys, as you called them from in the field, the regular, not they're not because none of them were regular. They were all extremely gifted and deserving of their selection. But they came from fighter weapons school. There was a strong component initially from those guys, but they weren't sort of the select few because now it was a bigger number of people. Did they know the history of idea? Did they know when you arrived in the squadron that you were actually there for the inception of these things?
no, I don't think that have idea was not released at that time.
Okay. So did you have to keep quiet
So
then? I mean,
they
were you allowed to say what you had done?
yeah,
Okay.
and not as I recall. I don't ever recall that talking about have idea while I was in Constant Peg.
Okay.
So I think it was still classified at that time.
Okay.
And flying the MiGs in Area 51 and all that. I think all that was classified as I recall, that didn't get unclassified till geez, maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I, I mean you were part of that trying to get some of that
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
It was 10 years ago that got
Yeah.
unclassified. Yeah, so all that have idea, have donut, have drill, all that was still classified. Maybe have drill, have donut might have been unclassified, but have idea wasn't. So so I came in as kind of a newbie. I think they gave me a bandit number like 20 or something
20.
like that.
Yeah.
And so so I was the 20th guy to get, get into PEG.
Can we talk about that? Seeing as you mentioned it, excuse me. Start that question again. Can we talk about that? Seeing as you mentioned it, so we did talk offline because I said to you that I had definitely got the sense there was some sensitivity among some people around bandit numbers because it indicates a pecking order. And I'm not going to get into the details of why that is. Suffice to say that that's the sense I get. I shared that with you privately. Why? But for the broader audience, it doesn't matter. You already described yourself as the Forrest Gump, effectively, of fighter pilots. Not egotistical, not hey, everybody look at me. Right place, right time, kind of, very sort of great humility. Um, when you were given Bandit 20, was there a part of you that thought, well, actually, I'm Bandit, -4 or -6 or whatever it is? Because the reality is that pecking order only began in the summer of 1977 with the formation of the 47th Test and Evaluation Flight. And did you get a sense from other guys like Peck or Iverson or Mayo that actually they were more or less bothered about bandit numbers than anybody else?
No, I think because I really didn't think twice about it because it didn't really matter to me. I mean, we weren't, you know, didn't put that on your flight suit or anything. So we didn't say, well, I'm bad at 20 and you're bad at 5 or that
Okay.
at at that time it wasn't really a big deal. Maybe some guys it was, but not to me. I didn't think twice about it. So I was just happy to be back. I tell you that.
Did
Uh,
you so at this point then let me just try and piece this together. So you've flown MiGs for a few years in the desert, at the same time as flying T-38 and then F5. You've gone to Tehran, so you've gone to college, or Air and Staff College, Command Staff College, sorry. So you've been out the cockpit there. Then you've been in Tehran. When you've been in Tehran, have you been flying the F5?
yes,
Okay, so
yes.
you are current fast jet current, but you haven't flown anything, let's say frontline in inverted commas. You haven't had the chance to fly the F-16 or the F-15 or whatever. Okay, so when you get back to constant peg, then and this is just a question rather than me trying to suggest anything. Is there some part of you that feels disconnected from the tactical air forces because you haven't been in a frontline cockpit for a few years? Do you feel like
Uh,
you know what's
uh,
going on in the squadrons?
I was just happy to be back flying. I mean, you know, I, I went off to a staff job. I went to staff college and then I went to a staff job. But I was fortunate to get a flying staff job. A lot of guys go up to go up to a staff and they don't fly for 3 years. So I was happy to, and I was very happy to be over in Iran flying fighters again,
Hmm.
or flying as a major, and and then getting back flying F5s and MiGs. I mean, that was great. And then I became and then I got let's see, in 81, I think, after the MiG incident, and I got selected to be squadron commander of the 65th Squadron, so aggressors. So I did that for 2 years, and so I got I got promoted to lieutenant colonel during that time, and then became squadron commander, and then I got selected for Air War College, which is a very prestigious assignment, the highest war college in the country, National War College, and in D.C. And only uh, people that are going to get selected for colonel or general go to the War College. But I went as a lieutenant colonel, and so that was a very good assignment. And then um, so that was in 83, 84, and then uh, so now they said, okay, Colonel Press, you've had your whole career, you've been flying airplanes, flying fast jets. Now it's time for a real assignment where you don't fly airplanes. So I got selected to go to back to Ramstein at the Air Force European headquarters um, at Ramstein, and I think and I became head of requirements there at UCV headquarters, and they gave me assignment to write the requirements for the advanced tactical fighter, the
Okay.
F-20. Okay, and and looking back now on why they selected me for that assignment was Bill Kirk was General Kirk was the head of um, uh, he was the DO. He was the director of operations for the commander. He was a two-star, one or two-star, and I think he's in your book, or maybe he's in one of the books because Bill Kirk, when he was in Vietnam, Bill Bill Kirk, uh, he was a colonel at the time, and he broke open the green door and created a combat tree
Oh, did he?
or T-ball. Okay,
People.
the program was called T-ball, where it's sensor fusion of all the comment, communications intelligence, the sensor intelligence, and it got fused into a situation awareness of what the enemy was doing. Okay, so they would know when the MiGs in Hanoi would take off and what their target was. Okay, well that was all hidden behind the green door and never got to the cockpit.
Yeah.
Well, Bill Kirk broke into that, and this is in linebacker two. There was a linebacker one and linebacker two. Bill Kirk got that information so it could get into the cockpit of the fighters that are going into Hanoi. That hey, you got two MiGs just took off out of so and so air base, and they're heading your way.
That's very
Okay,
cool. Was Combat Tree part of that picture?
combat
Combat.
tree was more of uh, identification, target identification based on uh, your radar returns. So in in uh, in the cockpit, you get a lock on a target. Uh, they can tell whether it's a MiG or an F4 just
Yeah.
by the radar return. Okay, so so that was a combat tree. T-ball was sensor fusion, and giving the pilots that are going into the enemy's territory some situation awareness of where the MiGs are coming out of, how they're getting vectored towards them. So Bill Kirk set that up
Okay.
when he was in as a colonel, and then so anyway, so I think Bill Kirk knew my background because he knew about have idea, and he knew about when he was up at TAC, he knew about have idea, he knew about all this secret stuff, top secret stuff. So he knew my background. So I think he got me over there. So I worked for him for 2 years and I wrote the requirements for the advanced tactical fighter. The requirement was to take off out of UK, advanced tech fighter, the F-22, um, climb up without afterburner, uh, climb up to altitude, um, super cruise into Poland without afterburner, super cruise at Mach 1.5 uh, into Poland or East Poland or Eastern Poland, and do a dogfight with the Russians, Soviet airplanes back then, and and do some MiG sweeps and stuff like that, and then super cruise back to Germany, hit a tanker, and go land. And the only time you're going to use afterburner is when you're dogfighting.
That's cool.
Yeah. So I wrote the requirement for that. Uh, that
How
airplane
how closely when you saw the F-22 come out, then how closely do you think it meets the requirements that you wrote?
was right on track.
Yeah. Did you ever
Yeah.
get to fly it?
No, no, I didn't fly it. So in fact, afterwards, I met when I went to work for Northrop Grumman, I met Bob Sandusky, who built the YF-23 that competed with the YF-22, and beautiful airplane.
Hmm.
He told me about how he designed the airplane around that requirement.
Right. That's very cool.
Anyway, so so then I spent time there, um, and then I went down to Zaragoza and became the ops commander of the gunnery school at Zaragoza, Spain, where all the uh, European fighters go down there. I set up with Bill Kirk's approval. I set up a fighter weapons school at Zaragoza. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so we did. Really, we started doing the mission commander training in at the at the gunnery school at Zaragoza, and we would bring in tankers and uh, bombers and F-111 guys and all the fighters and get the leaders that were going to be mission commanders for a large gaggle of airplanes and teach them how to be mission commanders and it paid off because while I was there they had the attack on Libya, the F-111s, El Dorado Canyon, when the F-111s took off out of UK, hit tankers and then attack, maybe 20, I don't know, 20 F-111s attacked Libya. One got shot down and a couple got damaged and recovered down in Spain, Rota, Spain. And I was in the command post in Zaragoza during that,
Right.
watching that watching that attack. And then so anyway, then I came back, got assignment at the Pentagon, got promoted to colonel, got assignment at the Pentagon, and then I was in charge of foreign military sales. So I sold F-16s all over the world. Uh, you know, every foreign country's got an F-16. I sold those.
Did you fly it?
Oh yeah, and when I was down in Zaragoza, I got checked out in the F-16, and
Oh, nice.
I flew it in Zaragoza.
So,
I was
so
I was, I was director of operations in Zaragoza.
had, had
So when
had things gone full circle then, Bat? So you talked about lightweight fighter exploited being exploited, or sorry, you were testing the MiG-21 and the MiG-17 against the lightweight fighter, and so that was the YF-16, YF-17. Um, was that then a full circle moment for you when you got checked out in the F-16? Do you think, yeah, this,
yeah, that was the best airplane I've ever flown. I mean, yeah, by far. Yeah, I mean, F-16, pull 9 Gs. The stick doesn't move. It works on force, feel. And you just think about pulling 9 Gs and you're there, in seconds, less than seconds. And it's the best dogfighter out there. I mean, you can, even today, I mean, it's probably better than the F-35, uh, just because it's built for dogfighting. That's what it was built to do.
hmm,
And and it's small, it's hard to see. So yeah, it's the best dogfighter out there. I tried to calculate, how many dogfights I've been in over the years, because when I flew the F-16 in Zaragoza, I wouldn't do air to ground. All I do is go up and do air to air. And so everywhere I went, that's all I did. I never liked dropping bombs. I just wanted to do air to air. But I got, I don't know, 6,000 hours and maybe, I don't know, 1,000 hours of actual dogfighting. Every sortie I flew at least 3 dogfights. You know, we
yeah.
dogfight and then separate, go do another dogfight. and red flag, all the dog flights and red flag. I probably got 3,000 dog fights over my career, uh, and uh, I've been I know now that again, situation always comes back. I mean, when I had the situation awareness, I'd always win. When I didn't have the situation awareness, I'd probably lose. So um, the anyway, great career. So then I get out. I retire in 1989 from the Pentagon. I go out to Northrop Grumman. And first assignment at Northrop Grumman is cruise missiles, stealth cruise missiles. At that time, they were developing stealthy cruise missiles, and one of the cruise missiles I was working was the BQM-74, which was a target drone for the Navy. Navy used it as a simulator to exocet missile, uh, where that be launched off a Mirage, off a enemy airplane, a Mirage or something, and it'd go out. It could go 300 miles. It had enough gas to go 300 miles, and but it'd go and you can. It had a little inertial in it, so you could program it to go after a ship, and they put they do a lot of this out at Point Magoo off the coast, California. Ships would come in off the coast of California. They either launch it off the ground or launch it off a C-130, and it'd go attack a ship that's 100 miles out in the ocean, and they'd shoot at it, with missiles or phalanx guns and stuff like that, try to shoot it down. You still there?
Yeah, still with you.
Oh, okay. And so that was one of my projects I had when I was at Northrop Grumman, and this was in oh late 80s. Well, 89, 90. And so the guys I was so then Saddam Hussein attacks Kuwait in 1990. Okay, I'm at Northrop Grumman on this program, BQM-74. One of the guys that was on the program, been there a long time, one of the engineers, said, Mike, the Israelis use the BQM-74 in Yom Kippur War uh, as a decoy against the SA-2s and SA-3s in the Sinai. I said, I didn't know that. Yeah, they told me all about it. So, uh, I checked with before I did anything. I checked with the boss, Kent Cressa, who was the CEO of Northrop Grumman at the time. Uh, I got up to him and I said, I think I got some people I know in the Air Force that might want to use the BQM-74 as a decoy in Desert Storm. He said, okay, I go talk to him. He says, oh yeah, go ahead. So I called George Molnar up. And Molnar at the time, he was the red hat. You remember he took over from Suits, and I knew him and have idea. And so he was the he was either head of requirement, I think he was head of requirements at the time up at TAC. Uh, and so I called George and I said, hey, George, I told him the story about the BQM-74 and Yom Kippur and how they use it as decoy. And he says, okay, that's very interesting, Mike. He says, do you check with Northrop? Would they be willing to give us some if we wanted them? I said, yes, I checked with him. He said, okay, let me run this up the flagpole and get back to you. So he called me back. He says, I'll tell you what, Mike, We think might want to do this. I think it's General Creech was the attack commander at the time. He's gonna let you come back to um, uh, Langley Air Force Base, and we gotta you're gonna jump on General's airplane and go over to Riyadh and meet with General Horner and General Schwarzkopf on this
Wow.
plan. So so I go jump on, and I'm let's see, I'm probably a year and a half retired. Uh, but because you're a regular officer, they can call you back anytime.
Oh, really?
Uh, yeah, yeah. If you're a regular officer, you're never retired. Basically, you're temporarily retired. But if they want to call you back in, they can call you back in.
Okay.
So so I go over there and meet with General Horner and General Schwarzkopf, brief them on this concept of using these drones to go after the now the SA-3s, SA-4s in, in in Baghdad. Okay, as a decoy. Okay, but they have to be launched off the ground. Okay, they couldn't launch them off a C-130 because there's only 300 range was only 300 miles, and the closest, so you couldn't fly a C-130 in there and launch them off of that. So they said, okay, well, we're going to launch them off the ground, uh, and so they bought the program, and so they said, okay, Mike, you get with Larry Henry. General Henry was the at the time was he was a one star, Larry Henry, who was a backseater at the fighter weapons school when I was flying the Have Idea programs. And he was over in Riyadh working the war plan in the they called it the basement or the black hole
Yeah.
in Riyadh. And and he was developing the uh, electronic warfare and the electronic order of battle. So they put the drones under his purview, and so says, "You go meet with Larry Henry tomorrow morning." I said, "Well, I'm over here in my street clothes." Said, "No problem. Here's some fatigues and some boots, and oh, by the way, you can have an AR-15 with you." So I gave me AR, and they said, "Meet Larry Henry at I don't know 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm gonna fly up to KKMC, which was uh,
King
the
Khaled.
base right on the Iraqi border between Kuwait and Jordan. And so Larry Henry and I go up there. We spend a couple weeks up there searching out launch sites. The trouble is the launch sites have to be inside Iraq because we had to drive almost almost 100 miles, 50 miles inside Iraq to in the desert to find a launch site that would satisfy because of the range of the drones. So we meet up with some special for now. Larry Henry, okay, he was a F4 backseater, but he also was a special forces guy in uh, Vietnam, and then he went to pilot school, washed out, and became a F4 navigator and uh, F4 backseater, and at the weapons school. And so Larry Henry says, "Well, I got a bunch of my buddies. They're French special forces and British special forces and U.S. special forces, and we're going to go find this launch site at night. So we're going to drive into the desert at night and see if we can go find a launch site." So we're doing this, for about a week, And one time we passed this early warning site, a rocky early warning site out in the middle of the desert. And there's nothing in the desert. I mean, there's no bushes, there's no nothing. I mean, it's just flat as a board. And some Bedouins would come by every now and then, but there's nothing out there except this one EW site. And so Larry Henry says, "Okay, well," I said, "Well, let's just go around that." He said, "No, no, no. I'm gonna go up and see what kind of security they have around this site, you know." And so he's taking some pictures and so anyway, we find the site, and so he goes back and he says, there's no security, there's no nothing out here. So what we're going to do is as when the war starts, we're going to take some Apaches and go take that early warning site out. You know, Yeah. I said,
Wow.
okay, okay, but he says, but I'm gonna show this to Horner. I'm going to show these pictures to Horner and Schwarzkopf. I said, Larry, I don't think that's a good idea. I said, you're a one-star general. You shouldn't be out here doing this shit. you know, in fact, I shouldn't be out here doing this stuff. But the special forces guys go do this. He says, no, 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 I'm going to do it. He says, I'm going to do it too. I said, I don't think that's a good idea, Larry. Not as a one-star general, be 50 miles behind enemy lines before the war even started. And so he does. He shows it. He shows it to Horner and Schwarzkopf, and they said, "Thank you very much, Larry. Pack your bags. You're out of here."
Did they?
So anyway, so that so anyway, it was a very operation went off just as we planned it, and it was a very successful. We launched the drones, um, and they were the drones went out to Baghdad. And then right behind the drones, well, right in front of the drones were the stealth fighters. So they launched the stealth fighters right in front of the drones. They dropped their bombs and 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 started getting out of there before anybody ever saw them. And then the drones came in and started circling over Baghdad. And that, if you saw CNN, that's what all the anti-aircraft were shooting at. That's what the SAMs were shooting at. And then they had the harm shooters, the Navy and the Air Force harm shooters right behind the drones, shooting the harms at the
Wow.
SA force.
How many
So
did you launch then? How many drones did you?
I think we launched 25 the first night and maybe 25 the second night.
Wow. And
Yeah.
what sort of parameters were they flying? Were they flying high with it? Do they have
Oh no,
um
going in at I don't know, 20,000 feet
okay.
and or 15,000 feet and subsonic. I mean, they had a little Teledyne engine on them, and they were and we of course we put reflectors in there to make them look
Yeah.
like a fighter, and
So
it worked.
was that all off the shelf then? Did you do any development prior to the actual launching of these things?
Much off the shelf. The only thing we had to do was program the flight and put the reflectors in there. We did some testing out at Point Magoo, and just to make sure the thing was programmed right and looked right on the radar.
Mm.
Uh, but it was pretty well. I mean, we started the program. Oh, I don't know. I was out in the desert for it was Desert Shield. It was called Desert Shield before the war started. So I went over there about October and January.
So that's pretty
So
close to, yeah. So January 17th it started, didn't it? So that's
yeah, January
okay.
17th. And I was part of the war planning group over there in Riyadh, and they were predicting that we'd probably lose thousands of flights
Mm,
uh, first, second night of the war, and they were predicting that we'd lose maybe 40 airplanes.
mm.
You know, and we only lost one. That was Stricter, Navy F-18 was the only airplane got shot down.
Yeah, Scott Spiker, wasn't
It
it?
got,
Spiker.
yeah,
Yeah, Scott
I
Spiker. Yeah,
got shot down by a
MiG
MiG 20.
25.
Yeah.
Did you have I'm beginning to run short on time, but so I'll keep my question short. But did you have any desire within you to be recalled to get back in the cockpit to go to the fight? Did you feel were you comfortable being in the role on the ground?
No, I didn't even think about going back in until I got called back in.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, but it was pretty good. Again, it was all part of and then develop the stealth fighter and all that stealth during that time between Vietnam and Desert Storm. And you look at the kill ratios, between Vietnam and even today. Uh, the kill ratios we haven't lost except for uh, Spiker. Um, that was the only airplane we've lost in the last 50 years.
yeah,
I mean, and we've shot down in Desert Storm. I think they shot down 40 airplanes,
mm,
uh, and between the Navy and the Air Force, and even the Allied, uh, and maybe altogether it might be 60 airplanes or 80 airplanes, I think, is the total number of airplanes between Vietnam and today. Enemy airplanes that have been shot down by U.S. forces, and only one loss.
yeah.
So the kill ratio is 80-1.
It tells a story, doesn't it?
Tells a story. The kill ratio of a F-15 is like 105-0.
Yeah,
They've never lost an F-15 in an air-to-air engagement.
yeah, yeah. It's phenomenal.
It is. It's amazing. So all that stuff that we did. So like I said, the time between 1970 and maybe 1990 when Desert Storm started. Those 20 years are probably the, the best 20 years of air power that we've ever had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on the channel twice now, 4 hours or so of you sharing your experiences with us. There is one question I have to ask you before we wrap it up. Your call sign. What's the story behind Bat?
Oh, this is pretty bad.
You
Uh,
don't have to tell it. There's no obligation to, but
it's okay. I was a lieutenant. I don't even know if I was a second lieutenant. I'd just gotten over to Europe, and of course back in those days, in the late 60s was even more rowdy than even the 70s, and Top Gun and all that, and Miramar, and uh, you know Tom Cruise. I mean, fighter pilots back then were crazy. I'd say crazy, you know. And another song that I like is Bob Seger's "Running Against the Wind," which was part of part of we were young and strong, running against the wind, you know. And so I was a dumb second lieutenant or first lieutenant, and so we'd go on these road shows, well, not road shows, weekend cross countries to Aviano and up to you know Denmark or and have these big parties with the other air forces in the fighter bars and play crud and play bar games and stuff like that. And so one of the games they played was okay, if you lose this game, then we gotta dare you to do something, jump out of a window or something. I don't know, something stupid, So they said, okay, Mike, you lost, so you got to go hang from that chandelier in the officers club by your feet like a bat, you know. And so I did. A goofball. So that's how I got my name, Bat.
So whose officers club was it? Do you remember?
I don't even remember.
That's brilliant.
That's how I got my Bat.
Well, no, but I'd say one thing I didn't say to you up front, but I'll say just in closing, just by way of really expressing how sincerely grateful I am for you to join us, is that you're the one of the interviews that I thought would probably never happen on the channel, because even though over a period of sort of the last 15 or so years we've had sort of some communication, and we talked when Constant Peg was declassified in 2006, and we did that on the phone. So we kind of had, sort of a cordial relationship, sort of back and forth occasionally. I always got the sense that you were a reluctant speaker. I always got the sense that you weren't somebody who wanted to sort of beat his own chest. And so I always thought we would never end up talking like this, and certainly we wouldn't be recording it. So sincerely, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing the breadth and depth of your experience with us. I think it's really important that we capture this stuff. You talked about how that 20-year period is probably the most significant in air power history from, all the years that have gone before. I don't think anybody could disagree with that. And so to have somebody who was there at the time, who was part of it, and who is willing to share that is tremendous. So thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. Well, Steve, thank you for having me. And I appreciate telling these stories. I tell them, off and on to some friends, and they keep telling me, well, you ought to write a book. I said, well, this is better than writing a book. In 4 hours, I can tell all my stories.